emotional regulation is the number one skill that you could develop, because what it will do is put you in a mindset to then do the tactical things to solve the problem or to push through or to not. Whatever the right decision is for you, you'll get to a much quicker decision and a better decision if you can learn to train that elephant. Matt, what's up, buddy?
What's up, dude? How's it going?
It's going. It's busy. I'm getting ready to head out to a franchise conference today. Fran Choice up in Nashville.
Nashville?
Yeah, the rumor was if you go on a run, which is like if you sell like 50, I think, in a 6-month period, because their conferences are every 6 months, you get on stage. I don't know if we're going on stage, but if not, we're at least, there's like a subcategory that's just below. That's like honorable mention. I think we're only like 3 licenses away from getting on stage, but we've got a few people that have had just extenuating circumstances where we couldn't get them to sign up.
So you have like 1 day to get 3 licenses?
Yeah. I mean, and we've got people in process that'll probably close here in the next week or two, but we have to do it.
It's still exciting, man. Good work.
Yeah, no, it's props to you too, man. It's like it's a team effort. It's a team. Business is a team sport. So.
I pretty much carry it. It's really all me.
Look, you carry the ops side, and that seems to be the part that is the most difficult right now. But the sales side, which is my umbrella, it was just killing it. Like, I've just apologized to you for drowning you in so many sales because I can't lower my performance for you guys. That's all. Anyway.
Sounds like a typical sales guy.
You get it, Matt. Hey, Matt, do you have a Did You Know?
I do. It's a really good one.
What is it?
Did you know that wombats' poop is cube-shaped?
Hold on.
They poop sugar cubes.
How big is it? 'Cause it sounds really painful.
No, I'm not even really sure I know how big a wombat is.
I've seen a wombat in Australia in real life.
How big is it?
It's like a giant, it's like a
cat?
Yeah, I'd say it's bigger than a cat. It's like fatter than a cat. Think raccoon sized.
Cool.
That could be a big old block coming out of there. That sounds really painful. I wonder if it has a square butthole.
Put that in your...
You know those things that kids do where you put the shapes in there? I wonder if it's done like that.
Put that little sugar cube in your coffee?
Bloop, bloop. That's
probably
like
a thing.
Kopi Luwak. Do you remember that coffee from the Bucket List movie where the monkeys eat the beans and crap them out and it gives it that special flavor? Jack Nicholson was all excited. Anyway,
can't
folks.
go wrong with a poop, did you know?
It's cannot. We're 12 years old at heart, folks. But we do good business, so trust us. That's what we're trying to say. Anyway, listen. My Did You Know is according to the University of Oxford, I had to read this, of course, they calculated the odds of which jobs are likely to become automated in the future. And you know, this is right around the corner with AI. So you ready? No offense if this is you, but it could be. Accountants, drivers, retail salespeople. I think we see some of this already. This next one I don't get. Barbers. We're going to have a robot cut your hair to cut your ears off, you know? Don't give a shit. Bank tellers, duh. Carpenters, don't understand that one, but I guess just cutting wood.
Just gonna make shit.
Yeah. Cashiers, yeah, we see that. Telemarketers, thank God. Butchers, bakers, there's no candlestick makers, so that's going to work. Servers and cooks are all at high risk of being replaced by AI.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
some of those things
there?
are already in there.
There is some things that we've already seen. You got the hamburger flipper thing, you've got retail sales. I mean, you self-checkout, same thing as a cashier, I guess.
Yeah.
Accountants, I don't fully get. Drivers, I mean, you know, when I was in Scottsdale this year, they are doing a beta test of the Google automated driving cars, and you could dial them up and just get right in. It would take you to where you're going. Nobody's driving it. It's just robot driven. We had some people that did it. I didn't even know it was there. I would have tried it. That sounds pretty cool, or terrifying, whatever.
Just drive you straight to jail.
Yeah, seriously. You better drive you right off the road, depending on who you are. Like if your search history has not been favorable to the government, they're going to crash you right off a cliff.
They know everything about
They
you.
do. It's like ejector seat right under the highway. God. But yeah, so anyway, I don't know if that's true, but everyone's speculating as to which jobs might be disrupted by AI, and according to Oxford, that's the list. So there
No
you
personal
go.
trainers?
That's the good news, Matt. Not one person mentioned personal trainer. Because people still need another human in their life to hold them accountable.
I mean, well, there's already 1,000,001 things, you know, videos and mirrors and stuff.
Tonal and mirror
all that
and
isn't
all that
making
stuff.
nobody do it anymore. Only people make people do shit.
You know, up to this point, you're right. I mean, AI might get there. Like we've talked about the huge gap in the younger Chinese population of like a lot of males because they had the one child only policy. And of course, in a grossest way ever, some of the female population wasn't necessarily favored. So they have this huge gap of these young men that don't have a match, literally a mathematical, they don't have a mathematical match. And so they've created this app. And it's sort of like that, was this movie Her or She or something like that?
Yeah,
the one where he had like the girlfriend. Yeah. So it's like,
girlfriend.
and it's acting as it's an AI de facto girlfriend, and people fall in love with it. And it's just an app. So who knows long term, but right now for the foreseeable future, at least, especially when you look at the crowd that we're targeting, because like you could argue that 45 to 65, certainly technologically advanced and can use it, but are still used to human connection, like grew up riding bikes and drinking water out of garden hoses, and not necessarily the folks that maybe have grown up having quasi-electronic only relationships, right? So it's like certainly for the foreseeable future, we're safe from AI.
This would be a good segue. Can you have an emotional connection with a AI girlfriend?
I can, but I'm a very emotional person. And speaking of that, our actual topic today is one of what I think is the most important skill, maybe for life overall, but certainly through the lens of business, which is being able to regulate your emotions. Knee-jerk thoughts, Matt? Because I didn't give you any heads up on this.
Zero heads up, other than I looked at your paper that has a lot of stuff on it. No, I mean, at 100%. There's different times in my life where, emotion drove certain circumstances and results, and obviously through experience and getting older, you learn to handle things differently. But yeah, 100%.
I've propped you on this before. I think a lot of it, what I just observe is like knee-jerk reactions to things, and you do a good job of like absorbing the info and then thinking about it before you calculate a response of any kind. And here's what I want people to hear. Like, there are people that can regulate their emotions better than others, but you can train that mechanism in your body. It's a skill. You just mentioned getting older and experience. That's one way to do it. Another is just recognizing how the system works, which we're going to talk about today, and how you could go about regulating it or starting to practice on how to regulate it, if that makes sense, right? Because it is key. I don't think any decision that you make based on pure emotion is a good decision. So let's just talk about some real cognitive science.
Hit it.
Go from there. So intuitively, we feel like our mind is working as a cohesive whole. Like the whole thing, we just think it just works. Like, we all think we're rational, and we think we look at things and we trust our gut and all these like funny statements that I like to make fun of, where it's like we think we just have these rational thoughts. But if we're honest, we don't. And what cognitive science will tell us is that most of what we're doing is intuitive, right? And it's all driven by habits and stacked experiences and other things. So that's basically broken down into two systems. One would be described as the autopilot system. And keep in mind, as we're talking about these things, it doesn't mean one is better than the other. You actually need both, but you need them for vastly different reasons, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And maybe how to train yourself to recognize when you're using one system over the other, and how to implement one over the other if it's needed. So here's the autopilot systems. This would be like your limbic brain, the way that we're wired, like monkeys, if you will, or like monkey brains, right? It's fast, it's intuitive, and it's your emotional self. So it's like, how do you feel when someone says something to you, or when something happens, or about a situation? A lot of it's just based on your lens. Somebody else could feel totally different about it, right? It requires no effort at all. It just happens. And you think about like what would be good about this. Well, if you were living back, 1,000 years ago, and you were being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger or something, right? You would want that system to react quickly. You don't want to have to think rationally. Now, is this a mean tiger? How long are it?
Kill it.
Right.
Run.
You just run, right? But I think in this day and age, we don't have as much of that. And I think we have to learn to regulate it. This is more of like probably a later development for us in science that we're having to work on. Whereas the limbic stuff that I'm talking about now, the autopilot stuff, it just happens, right? So it's automatic thinking, feeling, and behaviors and habits. So it's just a lot of times like your thinking drives your habits, and your habits just become like your daily life. And then a day becomes a week and a month, and that becomes your entire life essentially. And you're doing things subconsciously. So this is the way it was described in a really good article that I read yesterday. And it was like, mostly good decisions, 80%. So I know, right? 80, it's that 20 that you have to worry about. But so your limbic system or your autopilot, reactions are going to make pretty good decisions 80% of the time, right? So You are prone to what they describe as predictable and systemic errors, right? So there's like some things that you just are going to have blind spots on, and there's going to be some things where you just aren't hardwired to handle them correctly, right? So let's talk about what they call the intentional system. So this would be the opposite of that. This is where you have to think. So it's like, okay, it's conscious reasoning and you're more mindful, right? Instead of being more emotional. It takes intentional effort to turn on. So you have to literally think about overcoming the emotional brain to do the work, right? It drains mental energy. So, looking at that point, it's also like you can't make all of your decisions like, okay, you're hungry. You don't want to have to think like, well, am I really hungry? Should I? You know what I mean? It's like there's certain things where if you had to use your intentional mind more than that 20% to regulate the emotions, you'd be exhausted because it would feel like really hard decisions on every little thing in your life. And it doesn't have to be that way. But I think it's worth examining maybe the blind spots that you have, right? So drains your mental energy. It's used mainly when we learn new information, which we are kind of always learning if you're trying to grow, right?
Sure.
And when we use reason and logic, again, we all think we're doing it, maybe not as much as we think. And it can be turned on. And here's the important part. It can be turned on, the intentional system, when it detects that the autopilot system may be making errors. That's the key, I think. That was the key statement to me, where when you recognize that you're being emotional, you are able to use the other part of your brain, the logic, to turn on, to be like, okay, hold on. Like, was that meant in the way, like, is everyone out to get me this week? Or is it just, happenstance? Or like, I think we do this in business a lot. And if you're an entrepreneur, you'll get this. Like, sometimes there are problems that pop up in your business, especially if you're growing like we are. It's always uncomfortable. There's things that pop up and your knee jerk can be like, why are these things happening? These need to be fixed. Like there's something, and I'm air quoting, wrong with you and or your business if you're having these problems.
Sure.
If you don't take a minute to rationally think about these more intentionally, then you could think that was the truth. Like, we're screwed. Like, oh, this is a problem that no one else has. But if you zoom out a little bit, then quite often, if you sit with it and think on it, you'll think, well, wait a minute. Like, why? Of course we're having these problems. Like, these are normal, and they're not necessarily problems that have a simple, easy solution. They may just be things that have to be managed in your business over the long haul, not necessarily fixed. Like, think about with us, and we don't have any problems here per se, but think about like the relationship between franchisor and franchisee, right? So now, like, what's new, relatively new to us is not the fitness business, not the tactical things that need to be done. But now we're coaching a third party to do the thing, right? So there's a person or an entity or a collective group of people between us and the end user. And there are inherent challenges and advantages, by the way, of having that. But if we looked at those challenges and thought, oh, this is not like we viewed those emotionally as like, okay, it didn't feel good that we had to keep someone from doing something that they wanted to do because it was better for the franchise based on our experience. Not too dissimilar, not to be derogatory, but too dissimilar from like, okay, you've lived longer than your child. So you're like, okay, if you go there, if you jump in that muddy pond face down, you're likely to bang your head on a rock or something. So don't do that, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. That's the kind of advice we're giving. And then when you get a response that's less than favorable, then you feel like something's wrong with you, or you did something wrong, or you're mean or whatever. It's just, those are silly like responses. The goal is to zoom out and be like, well, of course it's that way, right? Mm-hmm. This is basic human behavior. And these aren't things that we're ever going to completely fix. We're just going to have to manage them over time. And I think we're pretty good at this because we often talk about like, well, of course it's going to be hard. Of course it's going to be that way. And if you're wired to think that way, then you don't get as upset and you don't have as strong emotional response to when things go wrong. Do you agree?
No, yeah. I mean, especially when you take, yes, we're new to the franchise space and you have a brand new franchisee. There's a bunch of, it's just back and forth. Right. Like, it's new to them. They're having that.
Right. And I want people to hear like this isn't a byproduct of like us not knowing what to do or to tell someone what to do. It's how do we feel in that healthy friction of that relationship. And it can make us feel, if we're not careful, like something's wrong. Or that like, oh, why is this happening? Oh, my God. And then you talk to someone who's been in franchising for 20 years, and they just would laugh about it. Like, well, of course. Duh. I mean, that's every franchise. And you're like, right. Really? Well, okay. So that's for us to logically zoom out, look at people that have done it before us, talk to them and be like, okay, yeah, got it, right? But if we're not careful, if we weren't wired the right way, we could feel like, oh my gosh, this is hectic. And I think a lot of people do that, even in small business. Like we're similar to how we were talking about people that have been in franchising for 20 or 30 years. We've been in the fitness space for 30 years. So if you tell me any story about a client,
right,
I will probably laugh because I've been through it like 800 times,
it
right?
has no effect on you.
Yeah. Zero emotional response from me whatsoever because I've been through it a million times.
Right.
All the hard stories, all the crazy reasons for canceling or this or somebody's upset or they're happy or I get them all. And it's like, yeah, of course, dude, duh. No kidding. Mm-hmm. And, you hear it and you feel it from, say, franchisees who maybe never been through it. And you're just like, it's fine.
Right.
Well, we're having the same response to, again, if you're growing, you're always growing and you're always uncomfortable and you're always in a new area and you always have imposter syndrome and all the fun things that come with it. But as long as you're able to zoom out logically and be like, okay, this isn't the reality. This is just me having an emotional reaction to this, and it doesn't mean it's true. You can feel a certain way, and I think that's really important about feelings too. This is another good little quip I got from the article. It says regulation, not repression. So it doesn't mean like if something makes you feel kind of that you don't feel it. Mm-hmm. Like I think if you judge that, like if you're like, I shouldn't feel that way, right? Like I shouldn't feel uncomfortable. Or I shouldn't feel underwater this week because I've got all these things that have come to me that I haven't dealt with before. That's where the problem comes in. It's the judging of the feeling, not necessarily just saying, all right, well, I mean, of course I have it.
Sure.
Because I haven't done these things before in mass or whatever. That's a new challenge, right? It's like, okay, we'll handle it through the lens of our core values and all the things that we know, and we're going to be just fine. But if you're not careful, you can feel that way, right? You can feel like, okay, I shouldn't be feeling this way. When in fact, everyone that's growing feels that way. So even if you're opening a first small business, if you're an Alloy franchisee and you're opening your franchise and you feel like there's all these things coming at you and client feedback and some's good and some's not. And it's like, I'm not cut out for this. It's like, you're going to be just fine. Like you're supposed to feel that way. And not judging your feelings of feeling that way is actually what's going to help you cope with it. Right? You recognize them. It doesn't mean you have to act on them. It doesn't even mean that they're real. But saying that you shouldn't feel that way is ridiculous. Of course you can. You're a human being, right? So we've talked about the book. What was the book? Switch, by Dan and Chip Heath. And they describe sort of the autopilot system as the elephant, right? And the elephant's big and massive, and the elephant does, and in their words, the elephant does what the elephant does, right? And then the intentional system is like the rider, right? And you imagine how small the rider is on the elephant versus the giant elephant. The elephant stampedes at times. It does what the hell it wants to do. It goes wild. Those are your emotions. But over time, and we've all seen it, you will see a tiny person be able to get on the back of an elephant and lead it and train it, right? But you got to train it. Right. So your emotions are no different than that. You've got to practice emotional restraint. You got to have like deliberate thought on things. Just some little strategies in there, like a couple strategies we can give that might help just tactically, but like, if something upsets you, don't respond immediately. So like you've talked about it, sleep on it, right? Or like one of mine is if I have like a message that I want to send to somebody that's very pointed and I feel like I've just got to get this point across and my ego's getting in the way, I'll craft the message and then sit on it for at least one day. Mm-hmm. That's my rule, 24 hours. And almost every single time I do that, I either don't send the message at all or I massively change it based on that little gap of time that's given me time to reflect. And normally, whatever emotions that I had temporarily, they either subside completely or they are watered down quite a bit, and I completely change my outlook. I might even see it completely differently in 24 hours because I slept on it and maybe talk to you about it or something like that.
Just emotionally, right? Just reacting to whatever.
Yeah, so that, and I also think, I'm not a big journaling fan necessarily, but I think if you're going through tough times, whatever those weird like feelings you have that are bullshit, sometimes putting them on paper is a good way to get them out of your brain and then to put them on paper. And just the act of like the tactical act of like out of my brain onto paper and then reading them, it's like your intentional system is more tactical. So it can read the crazy ideas that came out of your brain and look at them rationally as almost they were somebody else's and say like, that's all bullshit. Like, really? Like, that's what was in your brain, right? So that's worked for me. If I'm going through tough times like that, I'll just be like, all right, here's exactly what I'm air quoting feeling, because I'm not a very feeling person, but Here's how and it's a skill, by the way. It's a skill. It's a skill. Matt's laughing. They used to call me Spock at work, by the way, so that I'll just go show you. But I'm telling you, I'm having the emotions. I'm just not acting on them. So it takes a massive amount of effort. But you know what? You know why I'm Spock? Because I'm journaling. Spock doesn't journal. I do.
Journaling.
I'm journaling. I'm meditating. I don't do that. I probably should, but I don't. But I'll write all my crazy thoughts out on paper, look at them rationally with logic and be like, okay, you're insane, right? And just giggle about it and then get on with my day. So like if that helps anybody here, time is the antidote, especially to anger, right? So give yourself 24 hours if you plan on responding to something that upsets you. Second, if you are having like weird feelings about whatever, it's a business function, put them on paper, examine them with your rational mind, which is easier to do. And something about the mechanism getting out of your brain onto paper and looking at them rationally will really, really help you with that. So, and then really just all I have is the three big fears that are the three big emotions, that are going to affect you in business. And number one is going to be fear. I think that's the biggest one that we see, right? It's like fear of what? There's like so many things, like fear of the way that you're going to look, the way that you're going to be perceived, fear of failure. To who, right? It could be an outside entity. It could be a parent that, like, even if you're a grown adult, like maybe your parent's going to judge you or your spouse, so there's all this like fear-based thinking that we all go through. And that's probably one of the biggest ones that you have to mitigate because again, get it all out on a piece of paper, look at it, think about what's the real logic. You got any data to support your side of the argument? If you do, that's where you should go. Like none of us are, none of us are, absent of fear completely. It's impossible.
Of course not.
Well, when I used to do like race motorcycles or like when I was skydiving and hang gliding and all that, I was always scared shitless. Everyone's like, oh, you don't get scared doing that? I'm like, I am scared. But the idea is that you can be scared and still make a logical decision, like, okay, so the chute is packed well. I know what I'm doing. I've been trained really well. Jumping out of an airplane, it's thrilling, but it is scary, but you can overcome that fear, right? So like you're going to have, maybe it's a bad, everybody's like, I'm not jumping out of a damn airplane, dude. You're out of your mind. Matt's looking at me like I'm crazy. All right, let's say you're getting into a franchise. Like how many franchise candidates do we have? And I've heard it described as like the warrior to warrior wheel, right? It's like, oh, I'm fired up. Oh, you talked to somebody that said, oh, don't do that. Oh my God, I'm fired up. It's like they just go round and round this warrior to warrior wheel. And I think fear is something that if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to be in business for yourself, or you're going to be in a fast growing organization, you're going to have to be entrepreneurial anyway, I think, then you're going to have to be able to manage fear.
Well, speaking of franchise, it's the best thing because like, what do? We help manage their emotions through the process.
I always wrap up every single Discovery Day with like, Bronnie Ware's like biggest regret. She wrote 5 regrets of the dying as an Australian hospice nurse. And it's like, I wish I'd lived life on my terms instead of the life other people wanted of me. To do that, you have to overcome the fear of the perception of the other people or whatever those things are in your life. Right? To your point, I mean, franchising mitigates a lot of risk that comes with entrepreneurship. Look at the stats and the data, right? So like say, the percentage of businesses that fail in the first 5 years that you go it alone versus franchising, it's vastly different. It's like an 80% difference in survival rate from a franchise than going on your own. So look, there's a lot of ways to mitigate fear with logic, but if you just let your elephant run wild, it'll talk you out of doing almost everything, right? And there are people that are that way. Now, next, I would say anxiety, but because it comes with that. And I think anxiety would be maybe some of the things that we talked about where if you are new to entrepreneurship and you're opening a new business, say you're opening an alloy and it feels like you're drinking from a fire hose and you feel like you're really underwater, good. Like that's perfectly normal.
You should feel that way.
You should feel that way.
Worried if you didn't.
100%. Like we see it. We've been through it a million times. Right. We're very calm. We're here to help you talk things out. But I think I've seen this for 30 years with new gym owners or people that are new to processes that I've done a million times. And it's just always interesting to see how people react, right? And they do carry a lot of anxiety around the amount of things that typically that's the things that you don't know, right? Like if you know, and that's what franchising is, it's a map, right? It's a tour guide, if you will, from here to there. Then just come alongside us and we'll help you get there. And when you don't know and you feel a little bit out of control, and you will feel that way at times just because of the amount of new things that you're learning, your anxiety can go through the roof, but you got to be able to control that again. Yep. So that's going to be the elephant. You got to get the rider involved. You got to tame that elephant and be like, look, man, chill. We're going to be just fine. And lastly, I think anger is another, those are the big three, right? Fear first, which causes anxiety if you're too fearful. Then ultimately anger. And I think anger kind of stems from the same root system, which is like, somehow you perceive maybe the way that someone, is perceiving you or judging you or the way they're communicating with you, and you get angry. And if you're really honest, again, if you sit on something like get your thoughts out on paper, type that response email to that customer that made you angry, that maybe you felt like didn't understand what you were trying to say, sit on it for 24 hours, and then either don't send it at all or adjust it drastically. Right. And every time I do that, much better off. But I think also just knee-jerk anger can be a really toxic trait for your team. So, we often call that here like kill the messenger. Like if every time you came to me and you said, hey, here's what's going on, and I was like, oh, and I just flew off the handle, right? And it's very hard not to do that at times. If I did that every time, I would never get anything from you because you're like, I'm not going in there and telling that guy because he's going to lose his shit. Yeah, exactly. But I know how many people are like that, right? They fly off the handle at every bit of bad news because they're again, they're probably fear-based. They're brand new to something. They have a high level of anxiety because they feel like they shouldn't be feeling that way, which is not true at all. And because of that, one more little thing, that straw that broke the camel's back, sets them off, right? What you're doing then is you're basically telling your team, don't bring things to me because I'm not emotionally well-sorted enough to handle them. So you're shooting yourself in the foot from a leadership standpoint. So look, I mean, it's a topic that we could go on and on and on forever, but I think in the realm of business, emotional regulation is, I think, from what I've seen and what I've experienced personally, it is the number one skill that you could develop, because what it will do is put you in a mindset to then do the tactical things to solve the problem or to push through or to not, whatever the right decision is for you, you'll get to a much quicker decision and a better decision if you can learn to, again, train that elephant, right? And be a rider. So anyway, easier said than done, but I would say start working on it. There's a ton of resources around this. Books, just Google it and deep dive. There's a million really good articles on how to do it. But it's a skill. If you don't possess it naturally, guess what? Join the club. No one else does either. So if you recognize it and you build this skill, I think it will pay back, probably pay you back more than any other skill that you can develop in entrepreneurship.
Let's get some awareness. On a side note, did you know that elephant's the only mammal that can't jump?
Jesus.
You've been talking about elephants so much.
Go a whole 20 minutes of me on a soapbox about controlling your emotions, and Matt's still thinking about the did you know he didn't get out in minute one. Hey, anyway, that was good, but listen to this. Is that true?
Yes.
Is it just based on their mass? Maybe they have a bad rider.
Oh, God, no, they can't.
I can teach an elephant to jump because my rider is in charge of my elephant, and it's jumping all over the place. So on that note, folks, got a little weird today, but I hope it makes sense. I hope if you are feeling any of these weird emotions and you're in business for yourself, just know it's totally normal. A couple of tactical things. Pause with anger. Give it 24 hours. If you got some crazy thoughts in your mind, sit in a room early in the morning, write them all out, stare at them with your logical mind, and I guarantee you they're not going to look nearly as compelling to you as they did when they were just rattling around in that dome of yours. So hope this helps. And Matt, I wish I could say I enjoyed it, but I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.